we have an hour, and I will try to keep it to that, to go through, have a look at the lower performing topics at GCSE, GCSE stats. These things I often wonder who has the easier part, me or whoever from the maths team is supported in the background. And I think today I have it easier than Grace because I'm going to be signposting lots of resources that she'll be tagging in, going, oh, this is this resource that Mel's talking about. And have a look at some of the key ideas, and then hopefully share some ideas about resources that can help in the classroom. So before we do that, I want to have a look at the methodology I used. So, and this is literally going to take 30 seconds just to give you an idea. So I basically sorted the skills map based on the mean percentage to look at the lowest performing topics. I then had to exclude some. So if we zoom in, you'll see that at the bottom of the mean percentage that was scored, we've got those questions. So obviously they're parts of questions because of the way GCSE stats works. But because we're doing two other events later on this year, one event looking at appropriateness, so everything to do with those AO2 style questions where it justify the use of this average, justify the use of this diagram, is it appropriate? So basically everything to do with appropriateness. And then we're doing a second one about extended answers. So I excluded in the orange those to do with the justification and appropriateness. And then anything to do with extended answers, I also excluded a look at today because we've got sessions specifically just for those. And I didn't want, I think they warrant an hour of their own time. So I didn't want to take away from that. So that was paper one. And then I focused on trying to prioritise because obviously you get it. There's a massive quantity of data here where we've got the crossover between higher and foundation. So that leaves things like systematic sampling, histograms, and then skewness. I did the same for paper two. And again, excluded some. Oh, higher paper one, sorry. Excluded some because they're extended answers that we'll look at in another session. Did the same then for foundation paper two. And if you see right down the bottom, we've got reliability and validity. That's under that appropriateness. Spearman's rank, only 2%. Was the worst answered question on foundation. Stratification, again, I'm going to exclude that because stratification has always been in the past a extended answer where you have to talk about how you're going to collect a stratified sample. So I am going to include that in the session later on in the year. Then the same for higher paper one, zooming in, taking out appropriateness. And then what that left us with was 7 or 8. It left us with eight topic areas. So histograms, skewness, both of those became high priority for me because if you think about how we're going to support teachers, we want something that can support more students. So they're common items, i.e. they're higher and foundation. Then looking at sampling, specifically the definitions and making sure students understand the differences, binomial and distribution and probability, relative risk, Spearman's rank and regression equations, and then formal probability notation, which I then linked into number 4, just because it made sense because the kind of questions that I could find were very much to do with the binomial distribution. So that's what we're going to look at, specifically those. And then in terms of resources, I just want to make a note about one of the common comments we get is that a lot of the resources are just collections of exam questions. That will get easier over time. But then also, well, some of them are aimed at higher tier and I'm teaching foundation. So I just want to point this out when it comes to some of the resources. Sometimes I'm a massive fan of what I call over teaching. There's probably a Ponzi name for it, where we teach them beyond where we need them to be. So for me, I'm not looking for resources that are specifically aimed at a specific spec reference, because if it's to do with histograms, regardless of whether it's higher on foundation, I want them to see it all. What they will remember is a different matter. So I just wanted to point that out. And that is the biggest request. But it's really difficult. So if you imagine, stats has been around a few years, but the stats in its current guise, people want those questions, but there are other places to get resources. Exam Wizard, if you haven't got access to it, is phenomenal. Looking at the old, the Emporium, but not just the GCSE stats folder. So down the bottom, you've got your legacy qualifications, where you've got the previous GCSE stats. That is full of resources there with the old style questions. The reality is maths is maths. But then I also had a little hunt, and because I've been doing some resources for the qualification, some of the resources I've come across, and yes, it's level 3, but they're definitely worth a look. So we're talking about the maths in context. So it's the level 3 core maths that Pearson's is called Maths in Context. Definitely worth a look in there, despite it being a level 3 qualification. Some of the resources in there I'm going to signpost today. And you straight away, you can see that there's mean and standard deviation. You've got histograms in there, but there's a load of other resources in that folder. So don't just limit yourself thinking, I teach GCSE stats to just that one place. Have a hunt, have a rummage in the drawers, so to speak. And I will signpost some of those. Similarly, the textbook, whilst it's brilliant, but old ones are not defunct. I have a big pile of textbooks behind my desk that I'm looking at, and at the top of the pile for my GCSE maths is a blue Rainer. And some of you may be old enough to know what I mean when I say blue Rainer, because that's the one I dip in and out of when I'm looking for a load of practice questions. And then I've got a red Rainer, and they're the two at the top. So because maths is maths, but also don't limit yourself to just stuff that's for Pearson. Some of the other boards questions, some of the textbooks for the other boards will be equally suitable, because they will have if I don't know, histogram question, yeah, they might be slightly different, but we've also got to be aware that all GCSEs could have familiar and unfamiliar contexts. And it does help us avoid those recycling of questions, but it is really difficult. I've tried not to do that. But I hope you appreciate it's not always ideal, and not always the case that you can avoid it, but it will get better over time. The more we have qualifications, the more we have sittings, the more, I suppose we're lucky with GCSE maths in that we have 2 sittings a year. But the feedback is being fed back through to the maths team, and I know that we've got some new stuff coming along in terms of hopefully things like shadow papers and that kind of stuff, which will help us. Right, so the first topic is histograms. It is that age-old problem. They can do the maths. It's those higher order skills. It's the interpreting. It's the finding the median from, or finding how many above a certain, where they have to split a bar. But, and the question particularly, so part B there was to do with where they had to split the bar. Wasn't well answered, particularly, and in terms of foundation and higher. In foundation, a small proportion of candidates showed the correct working, but most didn't. At higher, part B of the question asked students to estimate the number of runners. There was a significant number of students that weren't able to identify the correct calculation. So it is the age-old thing that They can do the simple stuff where it's making that relationship between the table and the diagram, but when it comes to using the information or extracting information. So what I've done that hopefully will help us is I've gone in on the old GCSE spec and I've pulled together a load of trickier questions, ones where they either have no frequency density scale, but they're not just the straightforward ones. They've gone to the maths team to be put in a folder somewhere, and that's what Gracie's going to do now, complete with mark scheme and result and my work solutions. And you can, it's like everything, you can dip in and out. You can choose to use the question or you don't. Because I just thought it's those kind of questions, not oh, here's a table missing information and here's a diagram missing. They can do that because that's GCSE. And at the higher GCSE maths, they're not, we know that the trickier questions is a challenge. So and the more we practice it, so there you go, there's the first set of resources, and that was produced specifically for this event. But again, for me, that's something that we could use in maths GCSE as well. So it's trying to find something that's multifunctional. Then the second topic is skewness. Again, they can identify skewness. It's the interpretation. So they can identify what is positive, what's negative, and where it's symmetrical. But it's then, what does that actually mean? And it comes up a lot. So and again, if I look at what was said about this particular question, this part was the worst on the paper for foundation students. There were very few students that were able to determine the positive skew, and then even less that were able to interpret it. What does it mean when it's a positive skew? However, higher students could say what was positive and what was negative, but then they didn't understood what does that actually mean in any kind of meaningful statistical language. And the way we do that is we do it through practice. So we know this is something that we need to work on. So one of the things that I've suggested to the maths team that we will produce for people is a set of papers that have been adapted where they've got sentence starters in. So this question might say, complete the sentences below that could be used to identify, interpret the skew. And it might start, this is something skews. So, but we're only going to do it for those wordier questions. And that will be early next year when we do the next event, which is to do with extended answers as part of that ongoing support. I was quite excited about this event because we now have identified 7 topic areas that if we can show that they improve next year, we know that these events and these resources are meaningful and useful to people. So in terms of resources, the textbook makes it really clear what it means, but it's really difficult because it's almost a theme that runs through, because it's not just to do with, in this case, histograms. It's to do with box plots. It's to do with frequency polygons. So I pulled together, and I've called it, on my file name, I called it Everything Skewness, to do with, I think it's ideal for just before the exams as a resource thing, where you've taught all the main topics and you're trying to teach it through, right, so where else could skewness come up? And it's got a load of box plot questions, cumulative frequency questions. It's even got some estimate of the mean questions in there, just to show the links. Because that's what's become more and more obvious to me with stats over the years, is that it's so interlinked, all of those topics. And again, that will be something that that should be shared on the Emporium for people in the topic papers. It's 60 minutes or 59 marks, so it's quite a hefty one. It'll be in with the other themed papers, I think. I don't know. But again, has got my work solutions and mark schemes to support it. So they're the two new resources specifically for this event. Like I say, it's that interpretation. And it was interesting that examiners mentioned about being too vague. So we've got to think about how do we get students to, I'm not saying learn by rote, but understand what does the positive skew mean, what does the negative skew mean, and not being too vague about it. I was quite excited putting them together and going through there was a really nice theme about that. It started off with the first few questions were just like, what's the skew? No interpretation. And then as it goes through, it was then, now interpret it. So you're almost hand-holding as you're going through. But again, those kind of questions will come up when we do I'm just trying to think, complete the sentence kind of questions. Right, so that was the second topic. Sampling. Right. The statistical inquiry cycle, because it's no longer part of the GCSE, it's not mentioned in Key Stage 3, I'm talking about GCSE maths or the Key Stage 3 maths. Whereas, go back 10 years maybe, there was that whole data collection, questionnaires, and how, just that cycle. And it was all removed. So it's almost like all of a sudden all this data arrives. Well, how did it get collected? And so there's no requirement for lots of schools to teach that inquiry cycle. Lots of people do. Lots of people don't, because they're locked into this. If it's not on the programme of study, we don't teach it. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, and we've got a group frequency data table. Well, where's that come from? Where's the data? So I think this one is bigger than just teaching them within the GCSE stats. I think it's part of the issue comes from some of the benefits we feel as part of GCSE stats comes from it being a math subject. So the kind of issues, and I also think that sometimes I've put there, it's very dry when you're just going, oh, this is a quota sample, and it's almost death by definitions. So when we look at the kind of thing, it was like the systematic on foundation paper 1, and you'll see it says the paper in the top right corner. They struggle to understand that choosing every 20th person was systematic. But it's really clear they know the different types, but it's almost like, and there was an even split of the correct answer, systematic, and then random or stratified. But are we teaching them more than just those 3? Because when we got to cluster, this was really answered poorly by the majority of students on higher. The vast majority of students identified as quota or judgment sampling. So we know we've got to do something about making sure that these definitions are embedded. So, and then the last one on this is about what makes populations. And again, on foundation, most students wrote that it was visitors. And I know some of you will be screaming at me going, oh, they needed the word all. Yes, they did. If they'd been asked what were the sampling units, visitors would have been accepted. But this is the population. I don't make those decisions. And we need it. So that's been emphasised previously as well. Right, so then in terms of resources, if you go into the GCSE stats folder on the Emporium, there is a specific folder for the statistical inquiry cycle. It doesn't mean that, I'm not saying look at it and have a look to see whether it's something that where you do have GCSE maths or you're able, is it something that we can incorporate lower down the school in year 7, 8, 9? Or is it but it's something that I think we've specifically, and there's some lovely stuff in there. Definitely worth looking at. Then there's one of the themed papers. Seriously, go and have a rummage. There's so much great stuff on the Emporium. So even though it says so this is a topic paper, you can see there in folder 4, there's a load of theme papers. So these are not new, but what I have done is I've now produced work solutions for them, just to show students, especially for those wordier questions, and they'll be in the theme paper folder. So whilst it's come up, it says they're for hire, that over teaching here, I think is key. Because if we just limit to teaching students what they know, the reality is they will remember less than that. So if we teach them more than they need to remember, they may remember what we need them to remember. So yeah, some nice work solutions, share them with students, they do have to realise that when it's some of those extended answers, there's not always one, there's always usually more than one way to answer a question. Right, this topic 4, higher paper 1. I think the reality is for a lot of students, the maths around this they find really tough. But there is a lot of confusion. So if I show you the kind of question that they found from last summer, it was that one. It was second worst on the higher paper. And it was either answered very well or really poorly. There was 2 extremes, which suggests, are they trying to answer these questions where it's poorly? Is it because it's a topic that's not explicitly been taught, and that some students are, and I'm not making judgments, but it is something that is quite process driven, so students can do it if they're taught it. And I know lots of you there will be teaching GCSE stats as an option. Some of you will be teaching it in an hour a week after school. So I'm not making that judgment at all. So there is again, the understanding on higher paper 2, that was really not understood at all. The majority of students gave a description of mutually inclusive events instead of independent. That might be one that I just not disregard, but just think, well, it's 1 mark. At this stage, if we were talking about massive impact, like a 4 or 5 mark topic, that's different. So looking at resources that we can use to do this, there's the higher tier themed paper. Again, new work solutions. And there is a lovely maths in context. So again, that level 3, there's some, honest to God, some lovely questions on there. They'll be relatively unseen top questions. Yes, they may be parts of it that take it too far. But it's that overteaching kicks in again. Might be questions that you find that actually, and because it's maths in context, you'll see that they're actually written. So you've got questions on there that are just you just doing the maths, but then there's context questions. So there's a story that surrounds it, which makes it really nice to do in groups where you can actually spend some time. Right, let's stop and read the question. Let's read it line by line. What do we need to do? So rather than just maths practice. So you've almost got the themed paper there for a load of practice, but then you've got some other stuff to do in class where you can spend the time with students using them. And seriously, go and have a look at those maths in context. There's some lovely stuff. Might be further than you want to, there's also one of the other themed papers there is mixed probability. And again, I've done new work solutions for them to show that you can share with students to say, right, these are what we should be doing. And I know from a subject knowledge point of view, I found the work solutions useful for when I've used them for other areas, and especially early on in my teaching career, it was useful, especially when you're a little bit uncertain about certain topics that I don't know, you might only teach once a year, once every 2 years, and you think, oh, I can't remember that. And it happens to all of us. Right, then we got relative risk. Right, the students, again, it's the same theme comes through. So they can do the maths. What we're struggling with is the interpretation. So what does it mean? And if we look at the specific question, so they could do that, they could find the relative risk. So again, this was a common question to both tiers, but it wasn't answered well by many students. So where students got the 0.75, they then misinterpreted the answer and said that there was a 75% chance of failing the skills test, having taken test A. And many instead stated test B was more difficult and showed no understanding of what that relative risk was. And again, it is quite a difficult concept for students to get their head around, specifically foundation students, I think. And then the argument would be at this stage, it again depends on context, where you are in your stats journey. Whether you're talking about, right, I just need to improve outcomes, I just need outcomes because I haven't taught it before, or whether you're trying to tweak your top end or whatever, your grade 4s, your 7s, your 9s. So for some, this is almost irrelevant, but the resources there in terms of, there is one, again, just because it's for hire, don't limit yourself to not using it if you're only teaching foundation. There will be elements of it. Again, it's that over teaching. And when they do see relative risk questions in a past paper or that you get out of a textbook or from any other source, they'll go, phew, that's easy compared to what you've been giving us. Which is why I'm a massive fan of over teaching. So yeah, again, work solutions, useful to use, show students, share, follow it up if you give it as a homework or even just in class. Spearman's rank foundation tier, this was, I have to say, this might be one that you go, is this a step too far for some foundation students? Again, it's the contextual interpretation of what it means. But for some foundation students, your higher end of your foundation students, we should be teaching them and teaching it in its full, in all its glory, I suppose. So the question, we talk about it being the worst on the paper. In terms of that, again, it's that interpreting thing that keeps kicking in with it. And understanding what does a correlation coefficient of 0 actually mean. And no correlation wasn't enough. Or should I have said there, no correlation wasn't enough. And too many students did write no correlation. So it's about what does interpret actually mean for students. There is interestingly enough, there is a command word poster that was done for this year as well, that's somewhere on the Emporium, that is, it's lovely. So it talks about all of the command words that you get, a bit like the maths one for the GCSE. It was produced maybe last year now. Send it to your reprographics, ask them to print it on A3, A2 even if you've got an A2 printer, and it looks lovely. And if Grace can find that one, there's a challenge, Grace. I didn't mention that one. Everything else I've mentioned, that's just occurred to me on the hoof there, putting her under pressure. Excuse me. Yeah, and so in terms of Spearman's rank, again, for foundation, I may not use the core for Spearman's rank. This might be one that it is a step too far. But it's still useful for your higher tier students because you've got those contextual questions in there. So there's all about the story behind, and then you'll see there's 43 marks, so about 40 minutes probably. So nice length to use in a lesson. Then we've got again, the Spearman's rank specifically for higher tier where they're having to calculate it. And then it goes on to about calculating and interpreting. Definitely worth looking at for your higher tier students, like maths in context one. And I'm just looking down, it does say there, so there's worked examples and the way they work is you get a question, a worked example, then you get some questions, then you get a question in context that's a worked example, and then you get some questions, one or two, sometimes might be more than one. And they are brilliant. Right, and then the topic 7, the regression equations. Again, it's all about interpretation. Interpretation. It could be argued, I suppose, that for this kind of question, some of it's exam technique, some of it is about talking to students about, okay, so let's look at how many marks, how many points do I need to make? So on a 3-mark question, I need to be making at least 3 valid points. But considering this was the higher tier paper, it was the second worst on the paper, was the interpret part C. Yes, part C was the second worst. I'm just checking my notes. So they really struggle to understand the gradient related to the rate of increase. And I think this whole rate of change it's quite a mature concept for students to get their head around. And because they didn't really understand the rate of an increase, what that really means, a lot were unable to explain and compare the relationships. And where they were able to have a go, it was often just the first mark for identifying as the bones increased in length, the height increases. And then they just listed the lowest, highest gradients and intercepts, or would state that the males were taller than females. And again, this is where the work solutions and the mark scheme, I have to add, come in really useful. But then this is a topic I think that finding loads of worksheet questions. I couldn't think what they were called then. Questions that we can use in class that aren't just regurgitated is quite difficult. But then the maths in context, they have this one, the worksheet on regression, which is really, again, go and have a look at it. You've got your past paper questions that have got a worked example. Then you've got the questions in context with the work example. And then you've got some examples, questions in context for students to work through. They're great for you. They do spark so many conversations with students, but not just for stats, for some of the other, for normal GCSE. Who am I kidding? And then you've got the topic paper that's already on the Maths Emporium, because that includes, so the one for scatter graphs does include regression. which is really worth looking at. And having worked through it, again, really useful. And you look, and that's got 69 marks, which is 70 minutes. So there's loads there. And you might just, again, the context is so different in terms of how we teach, how you're set up to teach stats. Because all schools will, well, not all schools, but some schools will teach it differently. And you might choose to teach it by topic, you might teach it by themes. So yeah, definitely worth looking at. And then in terms of the other support, the one thing that we have just set up, Vicky Wood, who is subject advisor for the maths team, has just set up a little stats, I can't speak now, stats teacher group on Facebook, if you're into Facebook. Very early days, and it's interesting. Already the conversation is about resources for not specific topics, but basically resources. And I see the same on other social media pages where it is about where can I find resources. And I wanted to signpost a couple of other pages, and I didn't include them in the end. So you've got your Stats Academy, always worth looking at. But also the Emporium, absolutely. But then this, I think this could be lovely, because some of you sat there will have because some of you will have been teaching this for years. Some of you will have resources that over the years you have developed that maybe we can start sharing with each other as a group, because the intention should be, yes, it's a rapidly growing qualification, rapidly. And I can see that it's useful to students. But if we can help teachers teach it better, and that's not to imply that any of this. So I should add, and I'm going to use this point now. I should add that this isn't because we teach things poorly. It is it's one of any 120 different reasons why some of these topics perform poorly. Some of it is the question that was, and it's 1 year, it's 1 year in isolation. Some of it will be that students are not specifically taught really extreme topics due to time. I don't believe that happens a lot. I think some of it is to do with that it is a qualification, and we're seeing this more and more. And I'd be really interested in how many of you are running this as an option. I think this is something I might ask Vicky to have a look at. How many people run it as an option? How many people are doing it after school? How many are doing it as almost an add-in to their setup? So the school I've currently moved to, we're investigating putting it on as an option. It's not something we've offered here. I've only been here a year. We went with economics as an option this year, had a really, really good take up, and looking to do stats. And I think it's, because I do think it's a worthwhile qualification just to teach students to be cynical about data. Anyway, I've gone off on my little tangent. So join us if you're not already joined the Facebook page, share resources, and then the Maths Emporium. So we've got the practice papers, and in there, within that folder, and I'm just trying to think where it is. Where did I find it? In practice papers, I think. There's some papers in there for the statistical inquiry cycle. So all about collecting data, try to embed it in lower down the school. Let's try to get kids enthusiastic about data, because the world is so data rich. We're starting to produce common question papers, so papers that go over both tiers, so the common assessment items, all the past papers. The shadow papers are being produced for some of the previous series. And then new QLAs from last summer. And then the enhanced skills map, obviously. Then the exemplars, which I spoke about when I did the marking and the feedback. I found these useful for a couple of queries I had. I was doing some, I had some students using for another thing, a couple of last summer's paper, and we were working through them. And I wanted to show them what would be why their response didn't get the marks. And it was really useful for me to go and have a look at some of these exemplars. Again, specifically for those poorly performing topics. And then I've said we're going to do a deep dive into appropriateness. That will be a look at everything where appropriate comes up. So a bit like skewness. So the resource that I had at the second one I put together for this, that's got skewness across every topic where skewness comes up, that will be appropriateness. So it's almost a similar thing, but we'll go into a lot more detail about the specific topics that where appropriateness has come up in past papers. And I think that'll be really useful for, again, like the skewness, where you use it when you're bringing everything together towards the exams. I've taught you all of these topics. I've taught you estimate the mean, taught you histograms, taught you box plots. Now this is where you will see that skewness can be applied. The same for appropriateness. And then looking at extended answers will be in March. And then the dates for other stuff that's coming out. So January, we've got there'll be an aiming for 4 on foundation and an aiming for 7 on higher. And then, like I say, some more crossover papers and then the reordered papers. A note about the reordered papers. I love the reordered papers. What I'd say, and again, context specific, I wouldn't use reordered. So the reordered papers, if you're not aware, best way to explain them. They are papers that have been reordered based on the performance of the cohort. So not necessarily based on, so yeah, how that specific cohort took to the papers and how they performed. So it takes a little bit of that up and downness that you get throughout a paper where, oh, that bit's easier, that bit's hard. I wouldn't use them for my year 11s because I think my year 11s need to experience that feeling of getting hit round the face where you go from, oh, I could do that. No, I can't do that. Whereas if I'm introducing it to, and the same for GCSE maths, I would use reordered papers in it depending on the first time you give students, the first time they see a paper. You're almost scaffolding. Engineering success is the phrase I was trying to think of then. You're almost engineering a little bit of success, so confidence. My email address is at the top there if you have any queries. And I'm just going to, oh, Vicky, I didn't mean, that was a little bit of an, I thought I'd got to another slide then. The Pearson team, you've got Vicky. She's the curator of the Facebook page for stats, but she's also there for GCSE maths. And then Nicola Woodford-Smith leads the maths team. So if you want to contact them, please do. Then a note about the extended maths certificate. Do have a look at it if you teach GCSE and or A level. Note to do with stats because there is no stats in it. Listen to the podcast, and all of this will go up on the PD Academy. You'll also get a feedback thing. I'm going to come back to this presentation because I want to show you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. There you go. So this page, they are past paper questions. I've tried where possible to use stuff from the previous spec not necessarily from the current spec, but so there will be questions that they've seen before, unfortunately. But in my head, when I put this together, this was about when do we use it? We do it when we've taught all the content, and it might just be a general session where you're revising your box plots. Then you revise, so we've got them reading box plots, then we've got them drawing box plots. Interquartile range, then describing the queue, the skew. Calculates, comparing the distributions. There is a bit in there about stratified sampling, estimate the mean, drawing a frequency polygon, describing the skew in a frequency polygon. Then we've got describing the skew of each distribution in the box plots. So it's that theme. Then we got histograms where they're having to describe the shape of a distribution and being explicit about, oh, that's the same as describing the skew. So to use a maths analogy for that one, when it talks about describe the relationship on scatter graphs, what they're asking you to do is to describe the correlation. And there's plenty there that is enough for you to have those kind of to the point where you're comparing the skew of the distribution of the cars with the motorcycles. To have those deeper conversations about what does it actually mean. So that's what I envisaged it being used for. And then similarly for the histograms, if I show you the histograms one, I'm going to whiz right back to the beginning of those. I know that some people find that painful. Those 7 key areas, assuming that number 8 has been added to number 4. So there are 7 key areas. There is something there to help us teach it. The slides, if you look at the slides when you get them and view the note slides, on some of them you will see some additional information about the kind of mistakes that students are making, so the common misconceptions to help you in your teaching. And then I hope I've wanted to provide something that you could use in your teaching, some ideas and some resources that you could, and I don't imagine that we're going to change the performance of, I don't know, Spearman's rank on foundation massively. But I would hope that we could have an impact on things like skewness and histograms that are a bit more accessible. And things like maybe regression equations, just by having access to more resources that we can use in the classroom to give us the opportunity to practice more. And so I will particularly be looking out for histograms and skewness to see if, and that's the intention of these events, it's about making it students perform better. So yeah, that's me, and I'm going to then, I'm not a, what's the word or phrase I'm thinking of, a total optimist about, yeah, we're going to move Spearman's rank up the scale, but I hope that we can make a difference when it comes to interpreting and extracting information from histograms, and the skewness is the ones that I'll be looking at next summer. And over time, and if there's any other, and hopefully then as we type the next few years, we're no longer looking at the really, really low performing stuff because they've got better, and you then something else becomes the lowest performing topic. So it's about taking the lowest performing topic, taking it out and moving it up the list slightly. So yeah, that last one there, I didn't think you could see it, you can now, was about the lizards. And those kind of trickier questions, again, the overteaching. So there's a variety of stuff there ready for people to use. And yeah, basically everything will be put on the Emporium. And if there's anything we can help you with, I don't imagine will change the world, but I am particularly proud of, like I say, the skewness and the histograms, because I think they're stuff that we can use, especially post probably February, March, when we're preparing them for, or even those days, because stats is quite late, when you might get them in for half a day before the exam, if you're lucky enough to get away with that. So yeah, loads of resources. Hope that was useful. Check out the notes as well. There's only notes on about 6 slides, so I wouldn't print that the whole thing as notes, but view it on your laptop like I've been doing over there, looking at your notes. For those misconceptions, and there will be more resources as the qualification grows and we start producing more, and by we I mean teachers generally, publishers. But a lot of the really useful stuff comes from the grassroots teachers, which is us, which is why I quite enjoy these things, because somebody will always email and say, oh, have you seen this? So yeah, so thank you for your time.